your source for everything paranormal. Parax. Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Channeling History. We're the only show where we speak to the souls that made things happen, and we're brought to you every Sunday on the Parax Radio Network. I'd like to thank anybody that's not watching the football game at this point for tuning in. I'm Barry Strohm, your host, and I'll be doing the channeling tonight.
And I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host. I'll be asking the questions of our spirit guest tonight. Last week, we channeled the spirit of General George Patton. If you missed it, he spoke at length about the conspiracy concerning his death. Nothing like what was put out to the public back in those days. Tonight, we'll be speaking with the spirit of Walt Disney. His innovations in the field of movie animation and the construction of theme parks have left an indelible mark on our culture. He holds a total of 26 Academy Awards, more than any other individual.
Now, we never know in advance what our spirit guests are going to say or what other people think of what they're going to say. So it's always prudent that we include a disclaimer. The opinions or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits and do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of the Parax Network, or our sponsors.
All of our shows are available on our YouTube channel in the name of Barry Strohm. We now have over 220 channeling videos on there. If you would like to download them, go to Podomatic.com and just search Channeling History.
We're also currently doing a podcast named A Weekly Message from Jesus, which we post the messages each Wednesday. On Sunday mornings, we're also bringing you a weekly devotional message by a Holy Spirit on Eternity Speaks. This morning, we had Mary Magdalene as our guest, and she gave a wonderful message. It's multi-streamed on the various Facebook pages. It's included on my personal page in our group, Words of God Then and Now, and I post it on our YouTube channel as well.
Your participation in the chat room is always appreciated. We do try to use as many of your questions as possible, but since we only have an hour, we often do run out of time, and I'm sorry about that. Please tell your friends about it so we can continue to grow our audience.
Now, before we channel, as you know, we always say a prayer of protection. The prayer was given to us by spirit guides when we first began to communicate with the other side. So Connie will say the prayer, and we'll get right on with channeling with Walt Disney.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God.
Okay, Connie. It's going to be very interesting tonight, so let's begin speaking to our guest.
Walt, welcome to our show. We're so happy to have you. Would you like to begin with a message?
Yes, I would. I lived at a time when the technologies of the movie industry were at their very beginnings. When I began, we did not have color. We did not have many of the advancements that came during my career. I always tried to be very helpful to the families. We were making movies during the Great Depression. We were trying to help others. And it was a very, very difficult time in our history. Once the Depression ended, we had the Second World War, and it created many, many problems for all of us, as you're well aware. I know that I did have some shortcomings. There are some things that I would like to do over. But I honestly tried to do things that would support the family, that would bring families together, and make them laugh once in a while. So I know you have a bunch of questions for me, and I'll be pleased to try to answer them for you. So thank you for having me, and I'm ready for your questions.
Okay, how about if we start out with you telling us about your family?
I came from a fairly large family. We moved to Missouri when I was very young, so I grew up in the country, basically. I felt that I had very strong Midwestern values. My father was not a very good businessman, and he had many problems supporting the family. My mother was a very strong individual, and she raised us right. She introduced us to going to church, to caring for others, and she did an awful lot to guide me through my early years. I had a good family life. We were poor, but we had all that we needed, and I was guided to do things that would help others. They encouraged my artistic talents, and it was actually a very good childhood.
Yes, sounds like it. Could you tell us about delivering newspapers?
My father ran into problems supporting our family, so we had a newspaper route, and my brother and I would get up at 3:30 in the morning. We would deliver the papers, and then we would go to school. We'd return home, and we would repeat the process. It was a very tiring time, and it was hard work, and we never really got a whole lot of sleep. But it helped me learn about artwork. It helped me learn about having to support your family, and it taught me to be regimented in what I did.
Okay, why did you drop out of school?
I tried to enlist for the First World War. I was 16 years old, and they would not allow me to enlist because of I was underage. That was probably a very good thing, because the carnage of the First World War was terrible. When our guys returned home, many were ill from the gas. Many of them had limbs blown off. It was a very rough time for the country. I don't think the average person totally understood just how terrible war was.
Could you tell us about some of your experiences during World War One?
The only thing I could do was join the Red Cross. I actually got to go to Europe to drive an ambulance and to try to do some of the things that the Red Cross did at the time to help the soldiers. I got to see the carnage that had taken place. It was a very difficult time for me to see all the brutality that had been forced upon our soldiers. It was also a learning experience for me. I felt that serving others was very important, and I tried to do things throughout my life that would help others.
I think you were pretty successful. What was your fascination with trains?
My uncle actually worked on the railroad, and it was a time where our economy basically was on the shoulders of the railroad. Automobile transportation was in its infancy when I was growing up. Roads were terrible. It was not a time when you had interstate highways as we do today. The roads of the times were most often dirt roads. They would be muddy. Trains offered a very reliable method of transportation. I worked on the railroads, passing out newspapers and trying to do other odd jobs. It was just something that always fascinated me. I loved to hear the trains go by. I loved to hear the whistles. And it was a very fascinating time of my life.
Okay. Well, did you have psychic abilities?
I did have very vivid dreams. Things would come to me in my dreams. I would get ideas. It was not until I arrived over here that I realized that it was my guides that were supporting me in what I was doing. So I guess you would say I did have psychic abilities in that respect. At the time, I never thought of it that way. I just knew that things would come to me. I would get ideas. I guess if I had thought more about it, I would have considered them more of a psychic phenomena. But I had many of my dreams support what I was doing.
What was a laughogram?
A laughogram was one of the first businesses that we tried to set up. In those days, everything was done by hand and there was very little animation. And we would make up these cartoons as commercials for some of the local businesses. We referred to them as laughograms because we always tried to have a sense of humor when we did them and make people laugh. It was not a business that we could make much profit in, and we finally had to go out of business, but it represented my first business endeavor and also my first failure.
A shame it failed because I think that was a great idea. What was it like in the early days of the movie industry?
It was a very interesting time. The important people were individuals like Charlie Chaplin. They were not making talking movies in the beginning. They had to make humor through their actions. There were many people trying to make money in the early movie industry. It was a very difficult time. There were many people that were competing, and there was a lot going on. Once people started to talk, the sound of their voices became very important. There were many of the silent actors who had terrible voices that could not make it once they started putting sound to them. The innovation of color brought another radical change to the industry. It was a rapidly moving industry in the early days. We were starting basically from scratch with the concepts and technologies. I tried to be very innovative in the field of animation. I was actually a very talented artist. And in the beginning, I would draw a lot of my own figures. We tried to be innovative in thinking of things that would make people laugh. Today, the industry has become so powerful that there are so few players in it anymore. Most of the companies that are involved are huge organizations. A lot of the personal contact and ideas have gone out of the trade. As I look from this side, I'm amazed at some of the techniques and technologies that are brought to the movie industry. But in the early days, it was quite a simple business.
Yet, how were the early animations produced?
We would actually draw each frame. We would take celluloid, and one of our artists would draw a figure. Then they would draw a figure for the next movement that the individual was supposed to make. And we would wind up with thousands of these celluloid figures. And when you put it all together, it would magically make these individuals like Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse move and do many different things. The public was very hungry for this type of interactions. As you know, during the 30s, we were suffering a Great Depression, and people needed distractions. Our simple cartoons often brought relief and humor to people that could not find it anywhere else.
That took a lot of patience. What happened to Oswald the Friendly Rabbit?
I found out the hard way that you have to protect your ideas and concepts. Another studio laid claim to my idea and actually took possession of it through legal actions. I thought that Oswald the Friendly Rabbit was a pretty cool guy, but I lost the rights to use him in any of my animations.
That's sad. What would you tell people about the fear of failure?
Do not fear failure. I failed. I very nearly failed many times. I was lucky enough to be able to keep our heads above water. But if you're going to succeed, you're going to know failure. If you fear failure, then you probably will fail. I was always very confident in what I did. I always felt that every business or activity that I would embark upon would be a huge success. Some were huge successes, but some weren't. We had movies that flopped at the box office, and we lost large amounts of money through them. But we also had some great movies. Failure is a part of life. If you do not fear failure and repeat trying to improve your lives, then you will also probably succeed. Fear serves no one.
Thank you for that good advice. Would you tell us about your wife, Lillian?
Lillian is a wonderful person. I loved her. I married her. We had children. I tried to protect my children from the family because the entire life in Hollywood can be a huge cancer. It can lead people astray. They can do drugs. They can do illegal things. Hollywood has destroyed many, many people and many great talents. Lillian was very down to earth. We could discuss my projects, and she would contribute great ideas for me. She was and still is the love of my life.
How did you develop Mickey Mouse?
It was a time that we were attempting to bring cartoon characters to the people that they would enjoy, that they would laugh at, that they would be able to bring their children to watch, and it would be wholesome family entertainment. We came up with the concept of a mouse and a female mouse as his wife. I wanted to name the mouse Mortimer. Lillian intervened and said it was too high class, and she thought that Mickey would be a good name. So that's how that's how Mickey was born.
Why do you think Mickey became so popular?
He became popular because it was a time that people needed to laugh. Our economy was not doing well. People were not being able to care for their families. There really wasn't too much to laugh at. We tried to put Mickey in very humorous situations. We tried to make Mickey a cartoon character that everyone would fall in love with. He wasn't nasty. He was funny. He provided wholesome entertainment at a time when people needed to laugh.
I think we need him back. How would you describe your personality?
I was a lot of a perfectionist. I worked very hard, and I expected all the people around me to work very hard and to perfect their talents to the best of their abilities. I pushed people pretty hard at times. Probably pushed them harder than I should have. In my private life, I tried to stay very private. But in my public life, I tried to play the game that was necessary to be with others in Hollywood. I would consider myself having a fairly complex personality. When I had to be tough, I was tough. And I think that when I had to be sympathetic, I tried to be sympathetic.
Okay, one of our listeners said that Pluto is his favorite, based on your dogs. Which dog breed is Pluto?
Pluto is not actually any breed. We thought that we would make his form a cross-section of various different animals. All we knew was we wanted Pluto to be humorous. We wanted him to be an animal that everyone could love. And I think that we succeeded.
You did. What were your beliefs concerning God?
I was never outspoken about my beliefs in God. My mother had instilled an understanding in me that there was a greater spiritual being out there. I had trouble trying to understand a lot of the Gospels that were written, but I never doubted the fact that there was out there a supreme being out there. And now that I'm on the other side, I can assure you that there is truly a God that exists.
Indeed. How did you get along with the other big names in the movie industry?
Some I got along with, and some I had problems with. Our niche in the industry was in animations. Once we started to move into making feature films, we started to make other enemies in the industry as well, because now we were infringing upon an area that they considered their own. I tried to get along with everybody that I could, but there were certainly members of the movie industry that I did not approve of. I didn't like their tactics, and there were definitely individuals that I did not want to associate with.
What was the significance of Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf?
We came up with that during the Depression. We were referring to the Depression itself as the Big Bad Wolf. President Roosevelt was telling us that we had nothing to fear but fear itself. So we made up a wolf that was not to be feared. It was symbolic of the Great Depression.
What is the symbolism of the seven dwarfs in Snow White?
The symbolism of the seven dwarfs was that protection or individuals are available that will protect others. The dwarfs' role was to watch out for Snow White. It was a different type of characterization. There were people that resented that I used dwarfs, but I wanted to show that even individuals of reduced stature or physical abilities were able to provide protection for others.
Were you anti-Semitic?
I was never anti-Semitic of the Jewish people. Now, I did associate with organizations and with people that were anti-Semitic. It was a very difficult time in our country prior to World War II. There were many communist organizations that actually thrived in the United States. I did associate with some of those groups, their animosities towards the Jewish people. I hired members of the Jewish faith, and I was friendly with many of them.
What was your opinion about homosexuality?
I did not approve of homosexuality. I was raised in Missouri, and I considered myself a person of relatively conservative beliefs. Homosexuality was not something that I grew up with, and I had trouble understanding it. I know now that homosexuality is a part of a person's life plan, but I did not have that knowledge at the time. And there were times that I now regret that I did show that I did not like homosexuals.
Why did you fire Tommy Lee Kirk?
Tommy was a good person. He was also a homosexual. It's fine until I found out that Tommy was having a relationship with a 15-year-old boy. I felt that that would bring terrible publicity to us if it was discovered, and I felt that it was wrong. So it was after I found out about that relationship that we parted company.
Okay. Could you tell us about the Union strike of 1941?
My animators were seeking to make more money. It was a very difficult time for our business. World War II had taken away all of our foreign markets for films. We were having trouble keeping our heads above water, and it was a very difficult time for us. We were barely covering costs, making movies for the Defense Department or small budget films, and they were demanding more money. I took a very hard line towards them. I probably should have been more willing to compromise with them. As a result, many of them quit and did not return to work. I found that it was very difficult to replace them, and we actually suffered fairly long-term problems because of the way I handled the strike.
What role did your studio play during World War II?
We made many movies for the Defense Department. We made patriotic movies. We tried to support the war effort any way we can or could. We tried to help raise war bonds. We did everything we could during the war. It was a very difficult time for us to be in business. Okay, let's take a small break here. We'll be back in a couple of minutes and we will continue asking Mr. Disney more questions.
Turn right after these brief messages.
In order for the light to shine so brightly, the darkness must be present. Tune in every Monday at 10 o'clock for The dark sun rising on the Para-X Radio Network.
Hi, this is Marla Brooks from Stirring the Cauldron. Thursdays are a great night on the Para-X Radio Network. We start off the evening with Journey into the Light, Chapter 3, with your hosts, Psychic Little T and Tabby Cat Gash at 7 p.m. Eastern. Then, on the first and third Thursdays of the month at 8 p.m., it's Tango and Friends, hosted by Bruce Tango. And on the alternate Thursdays at 8 p.m., tune in to Stirring the Cauldron, the Archive podcast. Every week at 9 p.m. Eastern, join me on Stirring the Cauldron Live. And then at 10 p.m., stick around for New Aeon Now with Lily Alley, Davron Michaels, and Christine Matza. Finally, to round out the night, join Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz on the Paranormal Encounters podcast. All this every Thursday, right here on Para-X.
Have you ever wondered what Jesus and his followers would say if you could receive their messages today? In his new book, Spirits Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits, channeler and author Barry Strohm answers those questions for you. Using his gift of spirit communication, he brings you messages from such Holy Spirits as Moses, John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, Jesus, and even Mother Teresa and the Reverend Billy Graham. They discuss topics that are important for contemporary life in these troubled times. Spirits Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Signed copies are available on the author's website, spiritspredict.com. After reading this book, you will never again say, "What would Jesus say or do?" Welcome back to Channeling History. Now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Connie, we have more questions.
That we do. All of the individuals working in the inking department were men. Why? Did you consider yourself a sexist?
I didn't consider myself a sexist, but I must admit that I did not feel that any of the women that I was introduced to had the creative abilities that the men that worked for me had in my inking department. I know now that many women are as equally creative as men are, but in those days, I think it was because that women were not trained the same as men were. Keep in mind that women had just become more politically active. They've been given the vote. They were not generally as well educated as men were in those days. And I think it was merely a fact of lack of education. I certainly know now that it was not a lack of creativity.
Were you racist?
No, I was not a racist. But I was born in Missouri at a time of intense segregation. During those days, many people were very racist. I did not share that opinion, but I knew that many people in the listening audience had those opinions. Keep in mind that we were trying to appeal to as large an audience as possible with our work. So there were times that we probably did do things that when you look at them through your modern eyes would be considered as racist.
Yeah, your movie, Song of the South, has received both criticism and praise for the way it portrayed African American and white relationships. What do you think about the movie now?
When we made the movie, we thought long and hard about it. Now keep in mind, the movie was set in a time period after the end of the Civil War. We tried to portray things as they were in those days. Now, obviously, when you look at them with modern eyes, you look at some of the things that we did in Song of the South, and you'll say, that was highly racist. That builds animosity between the African Americans and the Caucasian people. We thought that we were doing a good thing with it. We made Uncle Remus a lovable character, and we made him a teacher. We thought that if he taught white children, that it would be very helpful for the times. I guess that we probably should have made some changes in Song of the South, but we did try to do the best we could to create commonality between the races.
If you filmed that movie again, would you make changes to it? And if so, what?
I would certainly make some changes to it for today's audiences. I know that some of what we did in the movie, people think was condescending. I would address it differently today, but you need to look at the movie in the historical context of the time that we made it and of the time it was to represent.
By the 1940s, your companies were in financial difficulties. What caused that?
We were just coming out of the Depression. World War II actually finally brought an end to the Depression because there was a lot of increased demand. Many of the individuals in our country were working very hard in the war effort. Many of the men were overseas. We had lost our foreign markets, and the soldiers were not exactly focused on Mickey Mouse. It was a difficult time for everybody, and we had just made Snow White, and we had run way over budget on it. So we had spent much of our reserves. So the early 40s was indeed a very difficult time for us.
Okay, while you had those difficulties, you met with Amadio Gianni of the Bank of America concerning the financing. Could you tell us about that meeting and why it was unique?
We knew that we had stretched our credit with Bank of America, and they could have pulled our credit lines and essentially put us out of business. Mr. Gianni said that they would continue to give us funding, and he said that our country needed what we were doing. He did not take the outlook of a traditional banker, and he is probably the one individual that saved our company from going under in the early 1940s. He was a wonderful person. I still thank him for it. He was not your typical banker. Today they would have probably pulled the loan from us, and that would have been the end.
Why did you think America needed a theme park like Disney World?
I thought that the common family needed a place where they could take their children, where they could relax, where they could enjoy what was going on around them, and where adults could actually think of their childhood and perhaps even relive part of it. I thought that a major theme park would be a wonderful addition to the culture of our country. There were many other small parks around the country. We studied them and we tried to do what we could, to make our park as enjoyable for everybody that would come through the gates.
Okay. Were you interested in cryonics?
I was interested in it, but I did not really know much about it. We were reading that it was possible that individuals could have their bodies frozen and that perhaps at some future time they could thaw the bodies out and cure what had killed them. And perhaps it was a concept for how an individual might have everlasting life. I absolutely did not have my body frozen upon death. I know there are many rumors out there, but I can assure you that did not take place.
What would you tell people about smoking?
I would tell them to never ever start. I was a very, very heavy smoker throughout my life, and I paid for it. I developed lung cancer, and that is what shortened my life. I think that if I had never smoked, I would have had many more productive years. I died before the facility in Orlando was ever completed. Had I not been a heavy smoker, I am sure that I would have lived to have seen that, and perhaps have been able to have some more influence on how the theme parks would have been run in the future.
After your passing, what happened to your body?
My body was cremated. It was buried. The ashes were buried. It was a very, very simple cremation.
Did you have a fear of death?
I must admit that I feared death. I didn't truly understand it. I had been so busy doing corporate matters that I had drawn away from attending church and truly understanding the concepts of death. Upon my passing, I found out that it was something I really should not have feared.
Yeah. Why did you not want a public funeral?
I had always tried to be a private person. I did not want individuals seeing my body upon dying. I simply wanted to have my body cremated and quietly buried. We did do a very small family gathering, but that was the extent of it.
What did you think when your soul passed from your body?
I was shocked. I never truly believed what was taking place. Suddenly I was looking down at my body, and there were other figures that I recognized in spirit helping me to move ahead. I must admit, it was a very pleasant surprise.
Now that you are on the other side, what would you tell our listeners about death?
Death is not something to be feared. It is simply the end of an incarnate life, and it's replaced with your soul life. Your soul lives eternal, and your soul will be able to return for more lifetimes should you choose to do it. Just understand that heaven is real, and if you live a good life, you have nothing to fear.
Do you see Davy Crockett on the other side?
I do. And he tells me that he enjoyed watching the show. He said not much of it was true, but he enjoyed watching it.
Okay, in 1971, when Disneyland opened, a ticket cost $3.50, the equivalent of around $23 today. Current ticket costs range from $119 to $224 per day, making it quite expensive for the average customer. What is your opinion of how the company bearing your name has increased its prices?
I'm very sad this has happened. When I opened the parks, I wanted the average individual, the person not making a lot of money, to have a place where he could take his family, that they could relax and enjoy a day. I'm saddened by the fact that the prices have been raised to such an extent. If I was alive, I would not have allowed this to happen.
Yeah, the Disney Corporation is one of the largest and most profitable corporations in the whole world. Their advertising, the theme parks, is directed at children, creating pressure on the parents to visit the parks regardless of their financial abilities, often creating financial hardships to please their children. What do you think about those policies?
I personally think that they are terrible. The current policies are in many ways going against the ideas that I had when we created the parks. As I said earlier, I wanted it to be a place that everyone could enjoy. Today is a place that people have to actually save money for years so that their children can be taken to it. I also do not like the fact that advertising is directed at the children so that the children pressure the parents to do things beyond their financial capabilities. I wish that the corporation would take a kinder and gentler outlook to their pricing strategies.
Okay. Why are you opposed to employees wearing beards?
In my day, we thought people wearing beards as being hippies or doing drugs. I wanted my employees to be very clean cut and have a very good appearance for everybody. I did not want anyone that was attending the parks to feel that my employees were not giving the best appearance possible.
The movie Mulan was partially filmed in parts of China where the government commits atrocities against the Uyghur Muslim population. What do you think of the company's current stand on China in ignoring the abuses of the Uyghurs?
I think it's a terrible policy. I wish that the corporation would dedicate funds towards helping individuals that are being oppressed. For them to actually film parts of that movie in the areas where Muslims were being tortured and killed, I think is a terrible thing. I wish that the company would look at the motives of China and understand that in many ways they are not our friends. I wish that the company would understand that it is not always the policy that makes the most money that will do the most good for our country.
Many of the modern shows feature superheroes, aliens, and time travel. Is there any truth to any of the characters?
Some of the Star Wars characters are actually quite accurate to some of the aliens that are in the galaxy. I would often have vivid dreams, and same as some of my other designers, and we would see these characters and we would try to incorporate them into our movies. So yes, some of those images are actually quite accurate.
Well, what do you think of the material presented to children on current streaming channels?
I think there's too much brutality. When I did the Mickey Mouse Club, we tried to have wholesome entertainment for the young. Today, the young are looking at much violence. They're playing games that are violent. They're spending way too much time looking at the TVs or their phones. I wish that the streaming channels would offer more wholesome entertainment for the young.
So, if by some strange miracle you found yourself back in the chairman's seat of Disney tomorrow, what would you do to influence a better outcome than where the country is headed on its current path?
I would reassess the violence that we direct towards children. I would reassess our advertising program, where we try to induce the young to pressure their parents into purchasing all of these expensive trips. I would try to instill the idea of patriotism to the United States in our management. I would not worry as much about the dollars that are derived from China or from other countries that are our enemies. I would attempt to bring more wholesome family entertainment that everyone could enjoy.
You need to come back. Your famous animations were created with thousands of cells of hand-drawn art. What do you think of the current electronic versions of animations used today?
I must admit that I'm amazed at some of the modern technologies. It's incredible what they can produce. I wish that they would use these great technologies to produce kinder and gentler images in their films and produce less violence. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I would like to see some of the old style cartoons come back, maybe put a modern twist on them, but bring things out that all children can watch.
Yeah. What's your opinion of communism?
I always hated communism. I understood that it was an evil governing policy. I disliked any individuals that were favoring communism. And during my times, after the Second World War, there were individuals in Hollywood that did support it. I actually tried to work with the FBI at times to call their attention to individuals that were communist sympathizers. I wish that people would understand the history of communism and socialism. I'm watching a push in your country today towards socialism. I hope that it's defeated. I know that no country has ever thrived under socialism or communism, and that's not going to change.
Okay, the final words that you wrote were Kurt Russell. What did you mean by writing his name?
I felt that Kurt was going to be a wonderful star for us. I wrote his name so that it would be remembered by our management teams. I'd hoped that they would get the message. I thought that if they encouraged him, that he would be a very good contributor to our corporation.
Out of all of your accomplishments, of which are you the most proud?
I'm most proud of the fact that I was able to bring entertainment to the common working person. I helped influence the direction of an entire generation. Many people watched the Mouse Club. Many people watched our cartoons. I do not believe that our cartoons misled any of the young as they're being misled today.
I agree with you. Of all the events in your life, of which are you the least proud?
Smoking. Smoking took my life. I wish that I'd never tried it. And I hope that anybody's listening either quits or never tries it as well.
Yeah. Well, we've really enjoyed having you here this evening. I'd like to thank you. Do you have a final message for our listeners?
Yes. I hope that I've been able to explain some of the things that took place during my life. I hope that I've been able to explain how I believe the entertainment industry should operate. I hope that you have listened to some of the things that I've said. I know that I was far from perfect, and I know that I made mistakes. But I hope that you try to understand why we did some of the things that we did. I tried to support racial equality. I never was active in anti-Jewish activities. I supported our government through World War II. I tried to be as good a patriot as I could. I hope that those of you listening out there will consider the fact that it is a time where our country needs great patriotism. There are many countries that would try to destroy us at this point, and there's going to be a time where the will of the people is going to be tested in the future. I hope that all of you listening will try to strive towards helping others, towards having better racial relationships by trying to coexist with others. You're living in a very difficult time, but we lived in difficult times as well. We had the Great Depression and World War II. You have got relatively prosperous times going on, but there are many that still need help. There are many that are having trouble raising their families, and there are many that are homeless. Focus on helping others. Focus on showing love towards others, and you will find that all will be well. So thank you for having me. Goodbye. If you ever wish me to return, I would be happy to do so.
Thank you.
Okay. So next week, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to change the format. We're going to channel 3 spirits from the entertainment industry. We'll be speaking with Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, and Whitney Houston. We're going to be asking questions of all 3 of them, and I think it's going to be an extremely interesting show. You can submit questions or suggestions for future guests through our email, channelinghistoryonparax@gmail.com. We are currently doing several other podcasts. We're doing a weekly message from Jesus and Eternity Speaks. These are all shows that will bring you spiritual messages of love and faith. You can find them on our YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in. We always appreciate our listeners and your questions. Join us on Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the Parax Radio Network.
And I would also like to thank all of you for coming this evening and listening. I hope you all have a wonderful week. God bless you all.
Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.